For centuries, knowledge has been hidden in plain sight across the sands of time. Whispers of lost civilizations, cryptic symbols, and forbidden histories have been erased or concealed. What if the truth was never lost, but hidden? Welcome to Eye of Ancient Mysteries, where the past speaks and the future listens. Sit back, open your mind, and prepare to uncover the untold secrets of our world. Let the journey begin now. Did the Great Flood really happen? The story of the Great Flood is far older than the Bible itself, and researchers are still studying its origins. The Great Flood is one of the most recognizable biblical stories. According to the Old Testament, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. So Genesis 711. As the text tells it, God saw the corruption of mankind and sent a global flood. Since Noah was righteous, God instructed him to build an ark, a rectangular, box-shaped vessel, for his family and to save two of every kind of animal, bird, and creeping creature. But did the biblical flood really occur? How much water is in the sky? The only thing we know for sure from geology is that there has never been a global flood, says David Montgomery, professor of geomorphology at the University of Washington in Seattle and author of The Rocks Don't Lie. A geologist investigates Noah's Flood, 2012. If you take it literally, as a worldwide flood that covered the highest mountains. I'm sorry, but there simply isn't enough water on Earth to make that happen. Montgomery explains to Live Science, if the heavens opened and all the water in the atmosphere poured down at once as rain, the planet would be submerged, but only to a depth of about 2.5 centimeters, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. That's not even enough water to justify using a canoe, let alone to float a massive ark. But what if we add more of this water from the heavens? If all the world's glaciers and ice sheets melted, sea levels would rise by more than 60 meters, according to NASA, which would add a bit more water. Furthermore, a 2016 study published in Nature Geoscience estimated that the upper 2 kilometers of Earth's crust contain 22.6 million cubic kilometers of groundwater, enough to cover the land to a depth of 180 meters. That's a lot of water, but there are cities situated thousands of meters above sea level. For example, Sofia sits at an average elevation of 595 meters, while the tallest mountain on Earth, Everest, stands at more than 849 meters. Moreover, geologists find no evidence of a global flood in the geological record. The biblical narrative also contains other questionable details. For example, Noah was 600 years old when the flood began, and humans simply don't live that long. The saved species would not have survived if reduced to just 2 individuals, as they would lack the genetic diversity necessary to rebuild viable populations. Furthermore, it's unclear how every species could have even reached the ark. Imagine penguins traveling from Antarctica to the Middle East. The story is much older and found all over the world, according to historical evidence. The biblical flood is a retelling of much older stories and is likely more allegorical than a literal description of an event. Ira Spar, professor of ancient studies at Ramapo College in New Jersey, explains that the biblical stories of the Old Testament, written between 800 and 500 BCE, were inspired by earlier oral traditions and multiple sources. Other religious texts, such as the Quran, contain a slightly different version of the Great Flood. The ancient Greeks also had their own flood myth. The story of Deucalion and Pera, the earliest versions of a cataclysmic flood, come from ancient Mesopotamian texts of the Old Babylonian period SK 1808 to 1595 BCE and reached Palestine in the latter half of the second millennium BCE. Existing texts show three distinct versions. The Sumerian epic of Zusudra, the oldest, found in a highly fragmented tablet dating to around 1600 BCE, though the story itself is older, and two Akkadian epics, Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, dating from about 1300–1000 BCE, the latter being the most likely prototype for the biblical account. The name of the hero varies, Zuosodra, Atrahasis, or Utnapishtim, but they are likely versions of the same character, and it is possible that the shortening of Utnapishtim, Utnaishtim, to Newish may have been pronounced Noah in ancient Palestine. Who knows how far back this story goes? Spar comments. It's one of the oldest stories in the world. If we consider the biblical flood as a regional flood, rather than a global one, the story becomes far less improbable. According to Montgomery, several geologically plausible floods may have inspired the narrative. For example, in the late 1990s, oceanographers William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed at a meeting of the American Geophysical Union that about 500 years ago, the Mediterranean Sea began flowing into what was then the isolated Black Sea, causing massive flooding around the region, an event that could have inspired the biblical flood, as reported by Science magazine in 1998. However, a 2009 study published in Quaternary Science Reviews argued that the flooding was not as large as Ryan and Pittman suggested, if it happened at all. Even though the exact inspiration for the biblical flood story remains debated, many flood legends from around the world appear to have originated from local catastrophic events. Montgomery points out that many Native American legends from the Pacific Northwest tell of floods resembling tsunamis, with enormous waves crashing onto the shore. The same is true of myths from the seismically active coasts of South America and the islands of the South Pacific. Another argument supporting the biblical discussion is the photographic and physical evidence of a large object embedded in Mount Ararat, the place where, according to Christian texts, Noah's Ark finally came to rest. In early 2006, Professor Porcher Taylor of the University of Richmond announced that, after years of analyzing satellite photographs, researchers had found in the northeastern part of the mountain a foreign object whose length perfectly matched the dimensions of the ark described in the Bible. This finding, first reported in 1974, and the satellite images over Ararat have long fueled the imagination of many scientists. Several research expeditions have also recovered fragments of petrified wood and 13 intact stone anchors from the area surrounding the supposed site of the geological treasure. Ultrasonic tests have revealed an ancient structure embedded in the rock. Despite the many texts from different cultures recounting a massive ancient flood, the scale and duration of such an event remain subjects of debate, even among those who believe it actually happened. As a result, few researchers accept the idea of a flood that engulfed the entire Earth, with most geologists considering such a scenario impossible. And while not everyone believes the ancient accounts describing the rebirth of humanity from the survival of a small group, there is some evidence that a climatic catastrophe may indeed have occurred across the planet several millennia ago. We can also say with certainty that people living at higher elevations had the means to survive and to pass down the story of what happened to future generations, until decisive evidence tilts the balance one way or the other. The tale of the time when a great flood washed away the sins of humankind will continue to be viewed as myth by some and as historical fact by others. Yet, whatever the truth may be, the knowledge of this great ancient flood remains forever a part of human history.